they don't want to miss the introduction. That's for sure, right? All right. Well, we will try to be punctual with these things. So why don't we get rolling, and we'll if people join us later, they can join us. But welcome everybody. My name's Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage. You were on here 30 seconds ago. You heard me talking to my colleague Molly. We're really thrilled that you're joining us for part of your Friday afternoon here with Dr. Raymond Bahr. Before I introduce him and turn it over, let me just say thank you to everybody who has given a voluntary contribution on behalf of Baltimore Heritage and the Baltimore Architecture. A sincere thank you. We are two groups sponsoring today's talk. Baltimore Heritage, you may know us, or you may know the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. A few housekeeping things. If you have questions, please put them in the question and answer box, and we're going to get to as many of them as we can in this little half-hour slot. So let me, before turning it over to Dr. Bahr, just say a word or two about him. He's asked me to keep it brief, and I will try to do that. But he is a retired physician and an inspiration, I have to say, to all of us in the history world who late at night stay up going down some rabbit hole of research, not knowing where it's going to lead to. He started out in Baltimore, was born here, and then ended up retiring here, got involved with the Canton watershed, and he'll talk a little bit about that, but his curiosity got him to researching things like where in fact did Frederick Douglass escape from, and that led, snowballed, I should say, into a lot of late nights researching, and then a lot of wonderful things, including National Register nominations, CHAP landmark designations, and plaques going up in Canton. And so I'm going to leave you with this. I know I don't want to speak for him, but I think if he had one message for all of us, it is to help instill his love of Canton and the importance that it played not only in Baltimore and Maryland, but really nationally on the national scene as well. And with that, I am going to turn it, and we're going to switch screen. Dr. Bahr, we are all yours. I think the one thing that is a little different is you're going to have to go this down button doesn't seem to work. So do down like that. But why don't you stay home?
Down here. Good morning. I'm retired cardiologist, and I retired to Canton, and I got involved with the watershed project because it was very meaningful to me at the time. The watershed project was the Harris Creek watershed. It has 17 neighborhoods starting at Clifton Park and empties down into the Canton area. This is right across from the Safeway, and you can see the trash being accumulated. And at that time, there was a great deal of trash, and I was involved in putting together a project called the Harris Creek Watershed Project, working with the Center for Watershed Protection in terms of putting together BMPs in order to take care of the water runoff, but also addressing myself to the trash. Where was the trash coming from? So actually, what helped was working with the individual communities to get them to understand that their trash was going down to the harbor. And we looked around and found out that most of the trash was coming from the backyards of vacant houses. And we put together an extremely rigorous program to reduce the trash. And we're able to do so going from 5 tons a month to about half a ton a month down and out the exit in Canton. But the question was, where was Harris Creek? Because this was a Harris Creek watershed, and went back to a map created by the University of Maryland, their visual department, and found out that in 1815, this was the map of the Canton area. You can see Fort McHenry up here, and then this is Clinton Street, and down here is where Lazarite Lighthouse is. And this is the Canton area, and you can see this creek that is going here, and it's a large creek, and it's going up uh, into the Canton area. And if you look, it goes all the way to Patterson Park. It's an extremely large creek, uh, and it was a very important creek. And Harris Creek was considered at one time the first Navy Yard in the United States. If you know, in 1776, we won our independence, but we were harassed on the seas by the British, and we needed to do something about the British on the seas. And George Washington and Secretary of War Knox came over to Canton, and they were able to establish that Canton was the first Navy Yard that to put out a what they call a frigate, a warship, sailing warship, and that was the Constellation, and that was launched in Harris Creek in 1797, and this is followed by many more ships being built there, the clipper ships that were used in the War of 1812. So the question came up, what happened to Harris Creek? What happened to this first Navy Yard in the United States? What was so important to interfere with that? And this is showing where you have filling right now, and this is what Canton now looks like, because you don't see Harris Creek. All you see is the piers and down Clinton Street, the area down there as well. So I went to the research it, and I found in Shirley Olson's book on Baltimore the fact that this is Harris Creek on that map, but in 1837, exactly in 1837, there was a bridge over the creek, and I was able to find the exact date, year anyway, in which this bridge over the creek was placed there, thereby doing away with any boat activity within the creek, and more or less could not build any more boats there. And then later on, this bridge, you can see this, it's a railroad bridge over Harris Creek here. And then because it was a large creek, more bridges were built going up towards Patterson Park, and eventually all these were filled in. And now we don't even see any of these creeks present. But a bridge was built over the creek in 1837. So the question is, what was happening at that time? And I was able to go to the Maryland Historic Society and find out that the Canton Company, which had just started in 1837, had made a deal with the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad to build a bridge over Harris Creek. But in addition, they were building a train depot about a block away. And this was the first mention that a train depot was in Canton. And this to me was eureka, because I had been to the Frederick Douglass Museum a number of times and noted that the Frederick Douglass escaped slavery in Maryland by taking a train in Canton. So now we have this train depot where Frederick Douglass took off. We have more evidence because in the logs of the Canton Company, it mentions that there was only one railroad that went to Philadelphia and to New York, and that was the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad. And they had two train depots in Baltimore, one at President Street and one in Canton. The one in President Street, however, had horse-driven cars that would bring passengers to Canton, where locomotion would take over. And the reason that was so was because in Baltimore, there was an ordinance that said locomotion could not be used at that time in 1837 because of would start fires and upset the horses and the like. So we knew the locomotion started in Canton. This had to be the train that Frederick Douglass took. We also knew it was just newly built. It had less security and was away from the action where he could be noticed. So that's why we feel strongly that this was the train depot that Frederick Douglass took with his elaborate scheme, as you well know. He came dressed as a sailor. He hopped the train at the last minute and had papers that would say that he was part of the Navy and the like, and was able to escape slavery. So we feel strongly that this train depot, which was located on Boston Street near Kenwood Avenue, which was called Chesapeake Avenue at that time, is the train depot. And as a result of that, we now have historic wayside markers there, working with the Baltimore National Heritage area to let people know that this is a site where Frederick Douglass took to escape slavery in Maryland. So we kind of knew that there was this entity called the Canton Company. And what was important about the Canton Company, this is a scheme, Tom Chalkley put this together graphically to show what the train depot would look like. And again, that's part of the display in Canton. So these are the two markers that are down there if you get a chance to go down and see it. So something was going on in Canton at that time. And actually what was taking place was pastoral Canton was entering an industrial age. And we know that because in the logs of the Canton Company, Peter Cooper was an industrialist from New York who actually purchased these 3,000 acres of the Donald estate. And within a short period of time, got other people involved and went to the Maryland legislature to put together the Canton Company. And the reason why the Canton Company was interested in that time in industrialization was because if you think about it, Baltimore came to be because the Baltimore town, Fells Point, and Jonestown. And 30 years later, there was Canton. When Canton came to become a part of that, the legislature said to them, more or less, we'll give you a charter that allows you to build a mini city that will compete with the trade that's being lost with the Erie Canal, and this entire area was involved with putting together the Canton district, the Canton neighborhood became a working neighborhood, and for decades. But it started right away. Within a short period of time, there were 14,000 homes, 20 feet by 100 feet. There's lumber yards, brick yards. There was a lot of activity to build up the historic Canton area for industry. And the first industry was the packing industry, packing for oysters, and later on packing for the produce of the Eastern Shore. There was a lot of product, and this entire area became industrialized, and a lot of people working for a long period of time. Success took place within a short period of time. The reason why it was so, because this Canton had a lot of things going for it. It had the water was about 35 feet deep, could take big ships. There was a lot of open land. There was demand from the 49ers out in San Francisco for canned foods, as well as the Civil War soldiers. In fact, you think about it, the canned food there was probably the first fast food industry being created. Um, so the next one, okay. So the Canton area, the Canton district, um, uh, came to be within a short period of time. It was a working neighborhood that came into being within a very short period of time. And when industry started, like the oyster industry, it was not just simply a packing industry. It had to go through a lot of inventions and innovations in order to get to the finished product and the like. In fact, at one time, the cans were produced by Welsh um, uh, 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 makers, and they could produce maybe 5 tins an hour. But Tindeco, at the end of that time, was producing 5 million tins a day. And also, with their 3,000 employees, Tindeco had 30 people that were focused on graphics. It was the largest tin factory company in the world at that time. Canton, within a short period of time, had a large number of companies that became first, not just in the United States, but first in the nation in terms of petroleum, in terms of the copper company, in terms of the packing company. The land between Chester Street and Lakewood Avenue was considered the canning center of the world at one time. So it's important to see that there was a lot of industrialization taking place, and was taking place because there was loss of trade to the West. The West at that time was Ohio, not California, Ohio, and people were trying to get to Ohio in order to increase trade. And the Erie Canal, which was started just about that time, was taking a lot of that westward. So the Canton Company was a company involved with the industrialization of Canton, and it was there for 150 years, from 1828 to about 1980. And if you really want to look, it continues to go on because of what's taking place in the eastern part of the Canton Company. Okay, so initially, the Canton Company was started with 3,000 acres of the Donald estate, but about 1870, when the Canton Company was gaining their confidence in the Canton area, they came to Clinton Street, and two things happened. They purchased the 7,000 acres of the Colgate estate, and this 3,000 plus 7,000 would normally equal 10,000, but our experts have told us that this is probably less than 5,000 acres, this footprint of the Canton Company. And the other aspect that took place was in 1870, the Canton Company built the Union Railroad. They built the Union Railroad to connect with the large trunk railroads. And they spent $3 million in 1870 to do this. So that was a bold move. They had confidence. They were moving east, and a bold move in order to connect and the like. And this is when they started going down Clinton Street. So the Canton area that we see up here, where Harris Creek is, then started going down Clinton Street. And initially, there's industries in terms of fertilizers, and they became chemical companies. But then the shipping industry started as well. And along with the railroads, the Baltimore Ohio Railroad, the Pennsylvania Railroad, as well as the Union Railroad, connectivity allowed a lot of the industries to flourish. So again, down Clinton Street, this area started to become industrialized and become a major part of the Canton Company. And as you can see here, it even took place in Locust Point as well. And there are many what they call railroad transfer bridges that allow the transfer by ferries of rail cars back and forth between Locust Point and Canton, because this became a working harbor with trains going across. That's how uh, uh, successful this area was. It's the view now, and to an industrialist, this is beautiful. But you know, it really changed the landscape, as you can see, of the Canton site from pastoral homes along the shores in Canton to the shipping industry. And this is the way in which we think the direction went. It went from the Canton area down Clinton Street and then start going out to Burning Highway, where you had the General Motors, you had Lever Brothers, you had Western Electric, and even now this continues, because on the lower side you have the Dundalk terminal, which was the old airport, 500 acres now dedicated to these large container ships coming in. We found a site for large container ships, which has increased the success of the Maryland Port Authority. And Amazon is just a little higher, a little bit north of that. Amazon, not just Amazon, but the conglomerates that go along with Amazon. If you go down Burning Highway, you see a huge number of buildings going up around the Amazon area. And then if you go a little bit more north, you see what's happening at Bayview in terms of the rapid evolution of the medical changes there. And in between, you got the dot-com companies, as well as a tremendous amount of apartments being, thousands of apartments being built to supply the personnel for this area. So this is actually a print of the Canton Company in 1904, showing you initially say 5,000 acres they would lease and go in partnership. The Canton Company with many of these companies, they would eventually sell them. And then this is a later one in color, showing in 1948, most of the areas had been bought out by companies. There were more than 150 companies involved over this 150 years. And about 10 of the companies were the largest in the world at one point. So the industrialization of Canton through the Canton Company of Baltimore is a major contribution to the Baltimore area. It came in late and did not become a part of the Baltimore initial site, but was allowed by charter that allowed them to build almost a mini city that was there. And if you read the logs, it had to do with the competition trying to keep up with the Erie Canal and the like. And it was very successful. And again, it lasted to about 1980. So this is Tom Chalkley put together a complete industrialization map, and this is on display in the Canton area, more or less showing you many of the major companies that have been involved with the Canton footprint over the 150 years. So in essence, Canton Company, through the Canton Company, played a major role in Baltimore becoming a major seaport and manufacturing city. And the Canton District provided a stable employment base for decades, at least 5 decades, remained one of the oldest and most successful industrial park developments in America's history. And the company controlled a substantial acreage, which he developed over a century and a half and generated employment for thousands of workers and millions of dollars in investment in Baltimore. The Canton Company would pick up its greatest successes developing the maritime shoreline industries that gained access to the shipping channels of the Chesapeake Bay and ports throughout the world. So the three discoveries that I was able to come upon. One, what happened to Harris Creek? And this was important because it was the first Navy Yard in the United States. It was done away with because of industrialization. And in so doing, they also built not just a bridge over the Harris Creek, but also built a train depot that Frederick Douglass took notice of and used to escape slavery in Maryland. And perhaps what I think is even more important is what took place with the Canton Company, which if you look at it from 500 feet, you see that it took over the entire area and industrialized almost 5,000 acres for 150 years and led to a huge number of companies being successful and a lot of industries being first in the world. And this industrialization has not stopped and continues. And there's a lot of successes that have taken place and a lot of lessons of leadership with the CEOs of the Canton Company. A number of them became mayors of Baltimore after they left the Canton Company. And I just think that there's not appreciation for the greatness of what took place in Canton over those 150 years. So I'll be glad to take questions concerning.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to jump in. I'm Molly with Baltimore Heritage, for those who don't know me. And first, I just want to say thank you, Raymond. That was wonderful. Someone named Dave Ben said, "Hi, Ray. Thanks for your dedication to the waterfront over all the years." And I just want to echo that too, and all of your research. I had a question, and someone else asked a similar question about the Canton Depot, where Frederick Douglass escaped from. Could you talk about that railroad terminal, where that site is today? Someone thought, is it the Tindeco site? And then my question on top of that was, is there anything remaining? Any hints of that?
Good question. It's on Boston Street, right at Kenwood Avenue. It was called Chesapeake Avenue at one time. When the Canton Company put that together, they put together 10 acres for train depots. They were debating with the leadership of Baltimore, and they wanted to take over and put together train depots for the Baltimore, Ohio, the Susquehanna, as well as the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad. But they were unsuccessful. So they were left with the 10 acres there, and it was mostly the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad. It was built about 1837. We know on maps that it existed to about 1870. And probably what happened was in 1850, the President Street station was able to get a locomotion and took over a lot of the passengers, and it had less activity in the Canton area. But it existed for about 50 to 60 years, and I spent all my last 10 years looking for an old photo of the train depot there, and I've been unsuccessful in coming up with it. But we know that it existed in the log of the Canton Company. It actually states that all the things were there. There were a number of engines there, a number of engines. It was a large site, and it was actually, if you're down in Canton area, it goes from the west side of Tindeco over to the 7-Eleven store or the the crab place there. So that entire area, 10 acres, and backed up on water where they had a railroad transfer bridge, and they could have boats come in there as well. So it had access both a boat as well as a train wise. And then the Canton Company also in 1904 built their own railroad, the Canton Railroad, which a lot of people in Canton have problems with because it holds up their commute a lot of times, but was able to get, because it was a switching railroad, was able to get in close to industry and to connect to the larger railroads. And did I answer your question? Was it both of it?
I think that was wonderful.
We haven't seen a picture, and if you
Mhm.
come up with a picture, maybe we'll come up with something for you.
There you go. You sort of alluded to this. This is a good segue. Someone said, thank you. They're curious where the Canton Company records are held.
Very good, very good. You know, I lived in Canton before I went to medical school, and there was a corner on June Street and Bale Street that was the old Canton Company. And I recall that because when I was growing up and playing ball down that area, there were some kids, not me, that would go into it was old at that time, would go into the place and they would bring out old bank records and all kinds of stuff. So it was there for a long period of time, but then it actually, towards the latter part of the Canton Company, moved to downtown Baltimore and was had an office down near the World Trade Center on South Street down there. And I think that building still has historic significance because of the Canton Company. And then later they sold that and moved into the World Trade Center. So it existed until 1980. But interesting enough, I didn't tell you all this, but the Canton Company was owned for a period of time by the Pennsylvania Railroad, but they let the Canton Company just to exist as such. They didn't touch it. And later on, a fellow named Murdoch, not the Murdoch with the papers, but David Murdoch, who came in and would buy companies and reduce the staff and sell them again, bought the Canton Company in the late 1980s. And he sold all the assets and saved all the books in the warehouses. And he gave the books in the warehouses to the BMI, the Museum of Industry. And many of those books are still in warehouses, and are being processed slowly, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I've tried to interest the University of Maryland Baltimore campus in doing this. They need some funding for graduate students in order to get more involved with this. There's a lot of material that can be used in research on the Canton Company. My plea is, let's get started. I'm trying to jumpstart it in some way, form, or another.
That's great. Thank you. We have a couple questions about Harris Creek. One person said, was Harris Creek ultimately put into a tunnel and covered over,
Yeah.
or was it completely filled in?
It's a large municipal sewer that goes through the Safeway. I'm trying to design something for the children in the area, and one of the thoughts of having somebody shop in the Safeway and have a sinkhole, and the kids start falling into Harris Creek, and then tell them the story of the history of Canton that way. No, Harris Creek's still there. If there's a sinkhole down there, it may get a lot of notoriety. But if in 1960, there was a huge municipal project to put that in there. I remember that because it went on Lakewood Avenue, went from house to house. It included the sidewalks, and it was there for about, I was going to say 10 years, but probably less than that. But it was a huge project coming off Eastern Avenue down to the safe way. And so it's a municipal sewer right now. It
What
exists.
Wonderful, thank you. And maybe just one last question to bring it up to the present. Someone asked, just wondering if there's a connection you can draw between the pollution in the watershed today and the history of rapid industrialization via the Canton Company and its affiliates.
Good question. And there is pollution from industry, no question. But when I got involved initially, the pollution was mostly from citizens in Baltimore. In terms of where they put trash, they would put them in backyards of vacant houses, and many landfills and the like. And once we identified 100 of them and cleaned them all up, we reduced the trash significantly down to the Inner Harbor. There were 26 outlets to the Inner Harbor. We tried to get the city to see if they could do the same thing with the other 25 outlets. They could clean up the harbor that way, but the administration at the time we completed this was not prone to do that.
Well, we are past our time already, so I will just say thank you again, Dr. Bahr, for your research and coming and speaking with us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Bye-bye, and thanks everybody for joining us.